Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
All right, my friends, today I want to talk about the Fauci Diaries. You remember Dr. Anthony Fauci. You remember COVID-19. You remember that entire debacle, so many things that happened there. Fauci's diary has been released to the American people, and I want to talk about this today. I want to revisit some of these, this period in time. You know, we need answers to what actually happened during the time of COVID-19, during the time of out-of-control government response. We need to be able to rectify the assault on our liberty that took place during that time. And friends, we've got to get to the truth. You know, and it also illustrates, which I want to get to time permitting here today. There was a CIA whistleblower who said that, hey, there is a deep state effectively running our government. And it exposes that as well, the bureaucratic state. You know, we have 3 branches of government, my friends, but many today think that we have 4. Many today believe that there's a bureaucratic branch of government that's not under the executive branch's control, that it should just be able to operate and function however it desires, and the president, the executive branch, have no control over that. That is not constitutional, my friends, and that's where we're headed today. These things matter tremendously, and I'm glad that you've joined me to talk about them. If you want to be part of the conversation, I welcome you at any time to text 317-785-1030. I read those messages, my friends. And you can also email me, todd@toddhuffshow.com. If you're watching clips on social media, feel free to comment below. Be sure to share and to comment and to like these videos as well so that we can reach as many people as possible with the conservative, not bitter brand message, my friends. If you're curious about Kratom or just trying to figure out who you can trust, well, let me introduce you to Christopher's Organic Botanicals. They are a family-run company. They offer natural, lab-tested Kratom, not the synthetic garbage that has given Kratom a bad name. Real Kratom is responsibly sourced. It's tested for purity. That's what Christopher's is all about. They work directly with farmers in Indonesia. They follow the same traditions that have been trusted for generations. There's no gimmicks, no shortcuts, just a clean, honest alternative for people looking for a more natural way to support their health. If you think Kratom is a good fit for you, you can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. It's a great way to begin. Coupon code Todd Huff. It's my first and last name, my friends. Todd Huff will save you 10% off your first purchase. Visit Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. So let's get back here. The Fauci Diaries. Let's spend a little bit of time here this morning looking back at the COVID era. You know, politics has a very short memory. A few months, which is now what we are away from the midterm elections. A few months, a few days, for that matter, can seem like an eternity in the political world. We move so frequently and so quickly from issue to issue, from sometimes crisis to crisis, from government overreach to lie in the media and crazy agenda items, crazy political platforms from leftist political groups, as we talked about yesterday with the Democratic Socialists of America, who are openly rejecting the American Constitution today and wanting to replace this government with something that is completely foreign to her founding. It's a fast-moving world. It's easy to forget, but it wasn't that long ago that all of us were under the heavy hands of the COVID tyrants. And I want to go through this for a moment in the wake of Dr. Fauci's COVID-era diaries being released. And I think it provides us an opportunity to just go back and to remind ourselves what we were subjected to by these tyrants and these just out-of-control lovers of big government. We'll look at what government officials did, what they said, what Americans were told. We'll look at the policies that were adopted, some just dictates by governors and so forth around the country. Anyway, we've got a lot to dig into, is the point here today. So the Fauci diaries have been released. There's more than 1,000 pages that covers the time frame spanning from late 2019 through 2022. This was released publicly by Senator Rand Paul before Dr. Fauci's scheduled testimony before the Senate. So these diaries contain a bunch of things like daily meetings, calls, media appearances, celebrity interactions, and Dr. Fauci's personal observations, opinions, thoughts during the pandemic from 2020 here in the U.S., but it began late 2019 in other parts of the world. So, of course, Fauci on January 29th of 2020, he recorded that President Trump told him, "Anthony, you are a really famous guy." And Trump also reportedly told him that we are counting on you. You know, in those early days, I remember this, you remember this. None of us had experienced this before. A lot of things can be true at the same time. You can be skeptical of your government. You can believe in constitutional rights. You can also understand that there have been global pandemics, that there have been health concerns, health scares throughout the history of humanity, and that it is in the government's interest to try to prevent those things from spreading, trying to do what they can for the public health. That's a reasonable thing. It's not reasonable how they did it. But again, in those early days, I remember this. I remember tracking this a little bit before it hit the United States. You know, there was this period of time where it seemed like a lot of the other diseases that never reached the shores of the United States. You know, we had frequently seen Ebola outbreaks in parts of Africa and so forth, but never anything that really spread outside of a specific area or maybe even a little bit larger region. Nothing that was a global pandemic. But this one looked a little bit different as it began to spread. Remember, we had the outbreak on the cruise ship. It was working its way across Europe. It became obvious somewhere along the way that it was going to find its way into the United States of America, and no one really understood it. If you remember, there were terrible reports coming out of Italy, people that were reportedly dying on the streets and so forth. It was a grim picture. It was, it's something you can't see. We didn't understand. And we were, candidly, just unsure, right? Wanting to do what we can to prevent this disease from spreading without, of course, totally abandoning everything else that we have here in this nation. And so Trump started off trusting Dr. Fauci, at least to the point to where he wanted to listen to his direction and leadership and so forth, telling him that he was counting on Dr. Fauci. And those were the early days. That's even before it reached officially. Well, I think it got here faster than we actually realized. But nonetheless, it didn't take long. It didn't take long for Fauci to kind of change his tune, or form an opinion, I guess, on Trump. Again, looking at these diaries. So it says in his diary here that after he had spoken with President Trump, this was in February, about a month after Trump pointed out how famous Fauci was and that we are counting on him, Fauci says, I encouraged him, referring to Trump, not to underplay the seriousness of the situation, since if it turns out bad, it will look like he's covering it up. Now, remember, COVID happened here in the United States during an election year. You remember this. You remember people, this is one of the problems that we had with COVID, was that it led governments, state governments, to unilaterally change election law. This was one of the problems we have about the 2020 election, that states, the governors, secretaries of state, whoever, arbitrarily extended deadlines for ballots because in part of the excuse of COVID-19. So we're in an election year. At the beginning, we were all kind of uncertain about what was happening, what this was going to look like. And by March of 2020, Fauci, again, referencing his diary here, repeated references that described Trump's press conferences as rambling, difficult to keep focused, increasingly frustrating to Dr. Fauci. And I think we can, even if you support Trump, you can see how someone would have that opinion of Trump. Trump takes to the podium oftentimes without much, it's not rehearsed, that's for certain. It's just simply Trump at the podium. And Dr. Fauci apparently felt like that it should have been a little bit more on script or whatever, but nonetheless, by the summer of 2020, the diary, Dr. Fauci's diary, began to have entries in it that showed that this relationship between Trump and Fauci was deteriorating quickly. In fact, Fauci described Trump with words such as desperate, rambling, crazy, truly an obnoxious adolescent. This is what was written in Dr. Fauci's diary from July and August of 2020. And so Fauci also in his diary commented and made several entries about how he was becoming an international celebrity. And on March 10th of 2020, he says, for better or worse, I am becoming an international celebrity. I would argue that that was for worse. March 22nd of 2020, Fauci said, many print profiles and features on me. The press is going wild with me. Fauci wrote, March 23rd, 2020, that the White House staff believed he had become a star that outshines President Trump. May of 2020, this is one of the most discussed entries in the diary. The situation, he wrote, with my national and international fame is explosive and really unimaginable. Listen, if there's a lot of things we can get if you look at what's in this diary, but one of the things you can see in this diary is something that we talk about on this program regularly. I would argue probably daily, but at least weekly. And that is human nature. It seems that Dr. Fauci was kind of smitten with himself, that he had become famous. You'll find other entries that he mentions, for example, that he was invited to appear on Dancing with the Stars. He declined to accept that invitation. He mentions other celebrities by name in his diaries, people like Julia Roberts, Steph Curry, Trevor Noah, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Matt Damon, Sean Penn, Larry Ellison. And so there was a degree, and again, listen, I try to be fair here. I'm not a fan of Dr. Fauci. I think he's done a lot of things that were very bad for, I think, our constitutional republic. I think he was just flat out wrong on many of the things he was promoting and encouraging during COVID. We'll get into some of those in a moment. But I try to be fair here. This is his private diary, his journal. He's just writing thoughts about what happened, or things that happened during the day. And listen, I mean, a little of this may be okay and normal, but it just seems from reading some of these entries that he was kind of, again, smitten with himself, kind of thinking he was maybe a bit of a big deal. And from the perspective of human nature, I think we can all understand that. So this is the sort of stuff that you'll get if you look at this diary. Now, David Morans, the diaries reportedly document discussions with longtime advisor David Morans regarding issues involving EcoHealth Alliance and Wuhan-related research. This matters because if you remember in the early days of COVID, there were questions about whether this was a naturally occurring strand or if this was cooked up and somehow leaked from a lab. Dr. Fauci came out very quickly and said that it was, I don't know the verbiage he used, I don't have that in front of me, but he led us to believe that it was fake news, maybe even conspiratorial, to suggest that this came from a lab leak, even though there was discussions, and this is documented in his diary as well, there was discussions amongst people that he was on conference calls with that thought that this very well could have been a lab leak. So a lot of things happen. And I think, you don't have to, I try to go back in time and again, be fair. I really try to be fair to a fault maybe sometimes. But I think some of these things in the early stages of COVID were understandable because we hadn't experienced this. We didn't know what was going on. We were told 15 days, remember this, 15 days to slow the spread. That turned into years of people being isolated, forced to wear, pressured to wear masks, coerced to wear masks. You could say borderline forced to wear masks, get inoculations, get boosters and vaccines and so forth. And as you look back at this, in fact, even at the time, I remember, listen, folks, I'm not a virologist. I'm not a scientist here. I'm a guy that thinks for myself. And listen, I read on these things. Of course, in college, we studied some of these things in, biology and that sort of stuff. And just being someone who's read and someone just who has a basic understanding of, say, the size of a virus and how it spreads and so forth, I had questions immediately. Many of you did as well, including, say, the 6-foot distancing. What do you want to call it? It's not a policy, but, it was basically thrust upon the American people. Dr. Fauci, during a congressional testimony back in 2024, testified that the 6-foot recommendation was something that, quote, sort of just appeared. There was no data about this. There was nothing to show empirically that keeping a distance of 6 feet was any safer than keeping a distance of 4 feet or 2 feet or 26 feet. It's just something that appeared, and that was pushed. This is, again, I think this is a case study. You could spend weeks on this program going through and breaking down all of the things that we should learn about human nature, about governments, about the responses governments make, about how there are overreactions, of how these things magically appear, like 6-foot distancing, social distancing, and all that sort of stuff. Fauci testified also that he was not aware of a formal analysis balancing, as it pertained to kids' masks, educational effects, developmental effects, social effects, against the possible benefits of masking children. Friends, I remember on this program in the early days, I had come across research, and it wasn't masking in the prevention of the spread of COVID because there hadn't been any studies on that yet. But I had come across something where a journalist, it's been years now, it's been 6 or 5 years, right? 6 years. So I'd come across some research and I read the article, and it basically had said the previous 5, 6, 7 studies on influenza, the slowing the spread of influenza by wearing masks, it showed that there was no significant change in whether in how that influenza would spread if people wore masks or if they didn't. In fact, I remember one of the studies found that wearing a mask actually increased transmission because people were constantly adjusting their masks. And when they would physically adjust their mask with their hand, they were getting the virus on their hand, which of course then led the virus to be on, things on desks, other things that people could touch like door handles and so forth. And it actually contributed to more spread. But we were told, if you remember back in those days, if you didn't wear a mask, you wanted people to die. If you didn't stay socially distanced, that you were some sort of an animal, that you wouldn't just oblige. It's your fault if you didn't get vaccinated. In fact, that's what they told us. If you remember this, they told us that it was a pandemic of the vaccinated. That's what not Dr. Jill Biden, but Dr. Jill Biden's husband, Joe Bribery, said as president of the United States. I mean, as I begin to think back, as I've thought about this, as I've read some of these journal entries, diary entries, and so forth that I'm sharing with you, it's taken me back. And it reminds me just how out of control these tyrants were. I remember at the time saying it's like a three-legged stool, right? You have an obvious need for the public health to make sure that we are doing what we can within reason to keep a disease from spreading. You also have the economy. We totally lost all concern for the economy, basically shut the economy down, said the government would be sending checks to people. This, by the way, was one of the big factors that led to inflation shortly thereafter. And of course, so you've got public health, you've got the economy, and you've got our constitutional rights and freedoms. That's the three-legged stool that was largely ignored, and everything was focused on public health. Even when they didn't have answers, they just made things up. That's what we see. And you can see a little bit of evidence of that through testimony and even through maybe some of these entries in the journal as well. But I've got to take a time out here, my friends. By the way, MyPillow has been a partner of ours for several years now. They have a line of products that I recommend. We have several of their products here in the Huff household. They've got, of course, their pillows. They've got sheets. They've got towels. They've got slippers, and they've got dog beds on top of lots of other things as well. MyPillow.com is where you can go. Promo code Todd's going to get you discounts on all of those products. Again, MyPillow.com, promo code Todd. I have to take a break. If you're watching the stream on Facebook, I've got to start a new one. I've got to take a break. If you're listening on radio or podcast, we'll be back here in just a minute, my friends. Sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking here about Dr. Fauci's diaries that have been released. It's amazing to me that people still defend this guy in light of what we've learned in the years since COVID-19 and in the days, after his diaries have been released. I mean, we can see the humanity of Dr. Fauci. We can see what mattered a lot to him, which seems to be, at least in part, his reputation, his celebrity status. We talked about that a little bit. But again, I go back in time. I go back in time to what they told us, which we've hit on some of those things, but also not just what they told us, but how some people reacted to this. Listen, some people treated this guy like he was basically a god. It is insane to me how some people reacted. I'm going to play a clip here by Zachary Magavero. He is at the time was a 17-year-old student. He lived in, this was performed, I guess, at Henrietta, New York. Now, he is on the autism spectrum. I'm not making fun of that. This is wild, though. This is wild. The response from the adults, the so-called adults in the room about this, the applause he gets for this. But this sort of thing happened everywhere. I just remember this one. You probably do too. It's about a minute long. Well, about that. and he's singing basically praise to Dr. Fauci, set to the tune of what? Mr. Sandman. I'm not going to sing. He's going to sing. Here you go. You remember this? Dr. Fauci. That's right.
Dr. Fauci. Give us vaccines.
Give us vaccines.
Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our masks and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant.
He's got papers here that
Fauci,
he's flipping.
yes? Promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some ease. Dr. Fauci, don't forget me.
Listen to the applause. I'm cut it off there, but the applause, he takes a bow. People are clapping. They're masked up. This was something that was done in New York. New York, by the way, you remember this as well. You remember, undoubtedly, Mayor Bill de Blasio, when it was time to encourage people to get vaccines, he created a program with, what was the, I forget the restaurant, the fast food chain. I just read it this morning, but it's escaping me. There was a program where if you got vaccinated, you could get a free cheeseburger and fry. It's just wild what we were subjected to. One thing after another. And as you read some of these entries in Dr. Fauci's journal, you begin to remember what was going on at the time that you're reading some of these things. So again, he's smitten with himself. He's smitten with the celebrities. He's smitten with his worldwide and local U.S. fame. And meanwhile, the rest of us are dealing with this sort of nonsense that I've given you just a little bit of a glimpse of here. Jimmy Kimmel, September 7th, 2021, during a monologue discussing COVID, discussing hospitals, discussing ivermectin. Remember that? Remember when ivermectin was considered to be only horse medicine? You remember this, right? I certainly know that some people took the form of ivermectin that was given to animals, but you can certainly get this drug as a human being, my friends. But that's something else that we were lied to. I remember at the time on the program saying the media, the people who were, of course, against Trump, against his reelection, the people who were basically going to oppose anything that Trump stood for that might give him political credit. I'm telling you, some of these folks are so evil. I think they were poised to be prepared for people to die. You could argue that maybe this happened. I've heard horror stories of people who could not get ivermectin. In fact, I have a friend whose wife was doing very, very bad until she got ivermectin. He could not get, even with the prescription, he could not get ivermectin at some of the large pharmacies because, again, we were living in an anti-Trump world, an anti-reason world, and the big pharmacies said, hey, we're not going to fill these prescriptions. You had to go to small pharmacies. I mean, it created whole business models where now you can find places that will write these sorts of prescriptions. I don't know how we can ever trust some of these people again, but Jimmy Kimmel, that's one of the people that we shouldn't trust, who showed his true colors, if that needed to be shown during the time of COVID. He criticized unvaccinated people. He criticized them. He mocked them. And he actually said if a vaccinated person is having a heart attack, yes, come on in at a hospital. The hospital will take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo, rest in peace, Wheezy. That's what he said to cheers from his audience. My friend Stephen Colbert of The Late Show, formerly The Late Show, that's not a show any longer, has been canceled. You might remember that they had dances where people were dressed up in syringe costumes, Broadway-style musical performances, recurring vaccine productions, vaxscene, to be a pun, a play on words for vaccine. I mean, songs encouraging vaccination, treating us like we are children, right? What was the old conjunction junction? I remember that as a kid. I remember as a kid in school, conjunction junction, what's your function, right? They actually had songs that they were singing to us, well, not to me, not to most of you, because we didn't watch this stupid garbage, but on the late shows, they actually had songs about vaccination. I played an example of that earlier here in this segment. But this is what we live to. I mentioned Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. That is Shake Shack. That was who the partnership was with. Basically, if you get vaccinated, you could get a free Shake Shack burger and French fries. What on earth? It didn't feel real. Nothing that we experienced during that time period felt real. We were, for those of you who didn't get vaccinated, you were criticized. You were basically called everything, well, maybe even up to and including the devil himself. Biden said, not Dr. Jill, President Bribery said that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. He said that September 9th, 2021, as president of the United States. He said that it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Rachel Maddow, during one of her meltdowns on her program, March 29th of 2021, she said, now we know, that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. This was not the case, but yet she said it. She continued to say a vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The level of stupidity, even at the time, that's not... It's just wild what they concluded. I remember having discussions, probably on this program, at least with other people. We had some people who were willing to set aside decades of medical experience, knowledge, what we've learned through the process of just learning, what we learned about immunity to diseases and so forth. We threw all that out the window, my friends. And if you didn't toe the line and repeat the things and keep socially distanced, wear your mask, get all your vaccines and boosters, you were demonized. You were said that you couldn't have a job. People applauded this. It's just a wild, wild ride for me, my friends. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky under Biden said our data from the CDC today, this was March 29th, 2021, suggests that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick. Just crazy. Just the number of examples and things we were subjected to at that time was just off the charts. I've got to take a break here as I look at the clock. Friends, ever notice how some people have a plan that lasts for generations? That is not by accident. Full Suite Wealth works with people who want their wealth to make a difference for years to come. Their team brings together high-level investment strategies like private equity, private credit, and options strategies, all coupled with expert legal guidance. It's all about making sure your vision becomes a reality for the people you love today and tomorrow. If you're looking to do more than just manage money, if you want to leave your mark and build something lasting, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Friends, I've got to take a time out. If you're watching on Facebook, I've got to start a new stream. We're just testing some things here. If you're listening on the radio, sit tight. Your benevolent dictator behind the microphone will be back, my friends, here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment. Time flies when you're having fun. I knew this episode would move quickly. There's a lot of things I want to get to. I want to shift gears. We talked about the Fauci Diaries. We talked about, kind of revisited some of the things we had to endure and deal with during the COVID-19 era. But in having that conversation, I thought this dovetailed nicely with another story out there. This is at redstate.com. Headline here, CIA whistleblower confirms shadow government is running the intel community and blocking Trump. You could also say, in a manner of speaking, that this CIA whistleblower confirms that there is, in fact, a deep state. And a lot of what we dealt with during COVID, I think you could easily see how the stage is set for there to be a government that's operating, a government that's so big and bloated with these professional bureaucrats like Dr. Fauci. They're in the midst, in everybody's business, just looking for ways to grow and expand. In fact, grow and expand so much that they think that they're better than the people who are elected to run this country. And that's the allegation here made by this CIA whistleblower who sat down with Catherine Herridge, who is actually one of the few real journalists out there, Catherine Herridge. And we'll play her just a clip of this interview, my friends, in just a moment. But let's face it, my friends, every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of America that we want to live in. That's why we launched here at the Todd Huff Show Freedom Marketplace. Freedom Marketplace is a free directory of businesses that align with your conservative principles and values. These businesses have made a promise: no support for leftist candidates, leftist causes, people who allow the deep state to function, my friends. And if these folks break the promise, they are out of the directory. Haven't had that problem yet, don't expect it, but that is exactly what would happen, my friends. So if you're tired of funding the woke agenda, you can head on over to freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. It's free, it's easy, and if I dare say so myself, it is the right thing to do. Liberty and business for all at freedommarketplace.net. All right, let's get here. I just have a few minutes to get to this. This is our shortest segment. Actually, I'll read from this article again at Red State. A former senior CIA operations officer is alleging that a, quote, shadow government is and has been operating inside the U.S. intelligence community. You could say this is the deep state. The idea of the deep state is that you have a bureaucratic monster that's so big and untouchable that you have nameless, faceless people running it behind the scenes. There's so many people, they're so good at what they do, in the sense, not in running our lives, but in keeping things under wraps. Disregarding the direction and leadership, especially when that leader is someone like Trump, someone who's a conservative, someone who's a threat to that bureaucratic system that has been created. So the shadow government is effectively the deep state. So in a new interview with investigative journalist Catherine Herridge, whistleblower James Erdman III describes a group of officials who see themselves as, quote, the adults in the room. I'm going to play this quickly because I don't have a lot of time. This is a clip of her interview and what the whistleblower is alleging.
These records got a lot of attention. They were instant messages sent by a senior FBI official, Nikki Flores, and she talks about running a shadow government across the FBI at this point. Is there a shadow government?
I don't know if people say I'm part of the, like wearing their shadow government t-shirts in the building where they're like, I'm part of the shadow government. But there's certainly people who believe that they are the adults in the room and they're here to make sure that, you know, the political leaders that are in charge, we can't let them do anything too crazy. You know, we're here to make sure we temper their worst
tendencies.
Thank you. I think that in effect, what you have are people who act as a shadow government, whether they know they're doing it or not.
Also in this instant message, it says that all election-related IIRs, these are intelligence reports, must come through FBI headquarters. Does this show that there was an effort to keep all of this election information on a close hold so that they could control it?
Yeah, of course. In my opinion, that's exactly what that means. If they're trying to get a handle on every single report that comes in and centrally locate it, okay, there might be some reason why you want to do that, but it sure doesn't look good. Not if you're over there also saying, hey, man, I'm part of the shadow government.
There you go. So, He says something there that's very interesting to me. You know, they don't have a t-shirt that says I'm part of the shadow government, although that certainly gives me some ideas on t-shirts. That's not how people think about it. In fact, they normally don't think about it that way. And I think this is one of the lessons when you think about the role of government, the nature of human beings. A lot of people don't end up making decisions that fall into these categories of, say, running a shadow government necessarily intentionally. They might just think highly of themselves. They might think, as he said there, that they are the adults in the room. President Trump is saying all these things. When it gets to our department, we're going to make sure that we slow walk this thing, that we temper it, that we end up doing it our way, that we ignore the parts of what he's ordering us to do that we don't fully agree with. This is by definition what a shadow government is, and they don't always get there intentionally. But folks, I've got to go. SDG.